All right, it's time again for Drummer Nation Live, the show where we talk about all things drum and drumming and drum related and drum oriented and drumnastic. I have two great guests today. We're going to be talking about periodicals, print, online, the whole thing with Phil Hood, the founder of Drum Magazine, and Steve Bryant, the owner and publisher of Classic Drummer Magazine. So don't go anywhere. Stay with us. We'll be going right now. It's time for Drummer Nation.
I absolutely love playing drums, and I couldn't imagine not having that in my life. And I really, if I could help facilitate that and have an impact on your life so that you can play drums, that means the world to me.
Hello everyone, my name is David Victor. I'm General Manager with the Craviato Drum Company. We wanted to offer a one-ply, solid shell product, but we wanted it to stay true to our mission of offering handmade drums of uncompromised quality built here in the USA. So take a listen to our Center Stage Series drum set.
All right, welcome to Drummer Nation Live. I've changed the format recently. I've done like 100 interviews, and I decided I'd bring my friends in and just do some live stuff, totally live, off the cuff, nothing planned, nothing rehearsed. We just go at it and have a good time. And so far today, it's Steve Bryant and myself. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Doing great. I see Mr. Hood has joined us.
He's working
It's
on
great
it.
to
I
be
don't
here
see
today.
his lovely
Yeah.
face yet, but when he does, I'll pull it up.
Yeah, he's there.
Oh, there
I'm
he is.
here.
There he is. All right, he's there.
There he
Okay.
is.
So
Right.
let's make it a threesome here. You got to forgive my switching. You've got an idiot
I
at
just
the
had to
switch.
turn off the AC, which is a constant presence here in Palm Springs.
There he
In
is.
Atlanta.
Yeah.
Hey, Phil, how you doing, buddy?
Good.
I have my hands full with all this switching, but I'll do the best I can. I can even put your name up there. And there he is, Phil Hood.
Woo.
Da-da-da. And where do you live, Phil?
Rancho Mirage, California.
And is that where you led the magazine from?
No,
Whoops.
magazine lived most of its life in San Jose.
That's what I thought. So you've kind of retired to the digs in the desert out there.
I'm thinking of going back to Northern California.
Why won't you do that? You missed
my
the
wife
fires,
passed away
right?
last year,
Oh, that's right.
and I was out taking a hike with a friend, and she said, "So, is this your home now?" And I thought for a minute, and I thought, no, my home is Northern California.
I know
So,
what you mean. My home is New
look
Orleans, and
around.
it always will be. And that's that, you know. It's
Yeah.
where you most comfortable. Okay, I think I got a good shot here because you're vertical and I got you dialed in that way. So
All
let's
right.
talk about periodicals since you guys are both experts on that. Phil, you founded Drum Magazine. When was that?
1991.
And how was it different than Modern Drummer? What was the focus?
Previously, before we did drum, starting about 88, 89, Andy Dorshik, who was the editor of Drum, and I were working on new publications being launched at Guitar Player Publications. So we helped start EQ Magazine and Bass Player Magazine. And Andy
didn't know
was the
that.
first editor of Bass Player, yeah. And Drums and Drumming. And our experience at Drums and Drumming was that our coverage was very similar to Modern Drummer. And for that reason, advertisers didn't really care if people liked the magazine because advertisers already had Modern Drummer. So when we started Drum, we pretty quickly shifted to trying to reach a younger audience, especially in the 90s when punk and grunge and rap were, creating not necessarily a new kind of drumming, but an audience of drummers that had not grown up on jazz and classic rock as much as our generation had.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided we wanted to really cover young people, and we weren't going to be sticklers for finesse and technique. We didn't want to only focus on the Steve Gadds and the Vinnies and the classic stars and Buddy Rich. You know, there were a whole bunch of drumming magazines that came out in the 90s, and each one had like Buddy Rich on their first or second cover. And Buddy Rich, you know, the big part of his career was 40 years before that. So we just began to focus more and more on younger players, and that differentiated us in terms of our revenue possibility with advertisers.
Well, you have to have what they call a core differentiator in every
Yeah.
business. Now, Steve, yours is a different story. You bought Classic Drummer magazine from Billy Jensen. A lot of people know. Tell me about your experience there and what your focus was. And by the way, you guys jump in with anything. I try to keep things moving, but it's not an interview per se.
Yeah, our experience was completely different, totally non-business based. It was. I had my band had opened for Pete Best in Atlanta, and Billy Jensen, the founder of Classic Drummer, was there to cover Pete, and so I met him, and very nice guy, and he gave me a Classic Drummer magazine, you know, the one that he had, and I took it home. I didn't read drum magazines. I don't want to play a paradiddle better, you know. I just don't, you know. And so I had just not cared about drum magazines since I was a kid. And when I was a kid, I pretty much read the ads and drooled over the drums, which in my older years, you can see behind me, were available on eBay. So anyway.
You're a lovely guy, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I just didn't look at the magazine. I threw it in my closet. When I went on vacation, I was looking for things to read. So I took the magazine, I threw it in my bag along with whatever else I could take to read on the plane. It's a 12-hour flight. And so I read it, and its differentiator was, again, not calculated. It was felt. And it was the story of people who had made very, very important music. They may or may not be, to Phil's point, there may or may not have been technically advanced or impressive to academic drummers or to young drummers who were chops. You know, listen, yeah. I took back the White Album when I was a kid and went and got 2 Vanilla Fudge albums because I'd rather listen to Carmine Appice than I would Blackbird. You know, it's just. You know, it's that age, you know, you're a chops guy. So anyway, all the people in there were people who had just done music that was so ingrained in the culture until the story of how that music was made captured me. And so I got to Hawaii and I called Billy. I didn't know him, but his phone number was in there. And I said, "Do you have back issues?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "I want every single back issue you have." I gave him the address of the condo I was staying in. I said, "Overnight, every single back issue you have." And I would only let myself read. I was over there for about 3 weeks. I would only let myself read one magazine a day because I would dread them all in a day. I was reading them cover to cover. I was reading the classifieds. I mean, I fell in love with the magazine. I just loved it. And so I was a subscriber like everybody else and waited for my magazine. And I noticed that the magazines were slow in coming. And I'm just outside Atlanta, and Billy was just outside Atlanta. And we got together and had some lunch. And not to my surprise at all, you know, the magazine was struggling. Yeah, it's a tough business, you know, and it's a tiny market. You know, the whole drum business. The entire drum business, everything that gets sold in the United States is about 1/3 the size of Best Buy's ad budget. I mean, it's no money. It's $300 million. So there's just not much money to be made. If you take 5% of that, which you think might get spent on marketing, which I don't think gets spent.
I agree.
I looked at Guitar Center. They do $2.4 billion. They claim to have spent $7 million on advertising. how do you spend $7 million on 2.4 billion in sales? It's
Yeah.
like not advertising.
It's nothing.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I met him, and over time, I saw that Billy had sacrificed personally, significantly. This was really truly a labor of love for him, and he had personally, financially sacrificed substantially. I owned another company, a media company. We did trade magazines and those kinds of things that, they make money. So
Yeah.
I had the ability. It was a relatively affordable thing for us to do, to buy the magazine. It felt good that Billy's got a reward for his decades of risk and stress and hard work, and it gave us something to do that we thought actually mattered more than our business magazines that made money. So anyway, that's how the whole thing got started. And I met Mr. Vosbein. My band was gigging at a Ritz, playing some black tie fundraising thing, and he had the regular gig in the lounge there. And I met him, so we all get together, and he asked me, "What do you look for in people that you feature in the magazine?" And my answer was, people who made music that impacted the culture. I would rather interview the guy who played on Louie Louie than some spectacular jazz cat that nobody ever heard. So, and if you look at Classic Drummer, it's the story of drummers who made really important music.
Mm-hmm.
And so
that was a good point you made to me. It's like, who are we focusing on? Look at the music.
Yeah,
ahead,
and I loved, sometimes you would have an interview with a drummer who just played on one big country hit. But
that was it.
He or she would have played on a lot more than that, but all we knew them for was that one thing.
That one hit.
And then we would get the story, and there's a million musicians.
Fantastic little stories.
Yeah. There's a million musicians who are just like that nobody knows about, but the song they played on.
We did one was a perfect example of that. We had a thing called Backtracks, and a song that no drummer would ever think of. Kenny Rogers, "Don't Take Your Love to Town."
Ruby, don't take your love.
Ruby. All right, you never think of it, but go back and listen to it. Pretty wicked little brush thing going on.
Yeah, that's right.
So we did a whole thing on the cat who played the brushes on that, and who else would do that?
And I bet they were thrilled too. They were delighted, right?
Yeah.
But if you sit down and really listen to those hit records, either the bass player or the drummer was really bringing it that day in the studio.
Yes.
They had to be. They absolutely had to be on the money, or it wouldn't have been a hit record. No,
so it's like Buddy Rich says. He says, if you got a great band with a mediocre drummer, you got a mediocre band. You got a mediocre band with a great drummer, you got a great band.
That's cool.
That's how it is.
It's the hot seat. That's why we call it the hot seat. So those are two different interesting stories of how you guys got involved, and you're both publishers. Let's talk. I remember, Phil, you told me a drum magazine, all drum magazines pretty much consisted of three things: interviews, education, and reviews. Is that about right?
Yeah, I would say those were the three big buckets.
And now I'm looking at interviews. There's a million podcasts out there. Education, there's all kinds of online academies and instructional sites of all sorts. And reviews are on YouTube by the millions. So there's needed to be some changes, and it's been hard for the industry to respond to that, hasn't it?
By the way, I think you just pointed out the reason Phil sold his magazine.
Yes, exactly.
But it's tough times befalling the sole survivors, so to speak, right?
Well, yeah, heck, to quote Donald Fagen.
Yeah, that's where I got
By 2010, it started to be obvious how many people were learning music on YouTube. Pretty early in the life of YouTube. And that started to undercut the value of having lessons in magazines. And
Mm-hmm.
and then interviews, by and large, what you find for free on the internet is not as good as what Steve or I put out, or what Modern Drummer put out, or what any of the traditional music magazines put out.
Mm-hmm.
Interviews with a journalist who's looking to get a lot of details. So you can find a lot of interviews, a lot of podcast interviews, but the quality is hit and miss.
Most of them are
And
just guys hanging out, it seems to me.
yes, the guys hanging out, and they have a list of their favorite drummers, and that's who they want to interview.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So whereas Steve had a technique there, he was looking for people that played on an important record, and if the more obscure they were, the better.
Mm-hmm.
And
And my thing when I did interviews, I did 100 of them for Drummer Nation, was to make it so once we got a few minutes in, it was just a couple of drummers talking about drums, and not the stuff, but drumming.
yeah, yeah.
And since I
So
was a drummer all my life, we could relate.
and then you know what? The third thing was reviews, and at one
Right.
time they were crucial. And there's a lot of review activity online, but there's nobody, again, trying to do a sort of 360-degree, really good critical dive into products on a regular basis. And
Mm-hmm.
you're always suspicious with YouTube as to who's getting free stuff and
Right.
who's getting paid.
Well,
who's
the
getting
whole
ad boosts.
speaking of free stuff, we've all discussed this before, but I don't think most people know what it means. If you're getting something for free, you're not the customer, you're the product.
You are correct.
You guys both know
I'll
what
tell
that
you this:
means.
we went years and years without any Pearl Drums advertising, because we used to finish a review. It was either done in-house or it was done by a freelancer, edit it, and then we would either send the spec sheet or the whole review to the company and say, is what we said here correct?
Mm-hmm.
And Pearl, I have so many good friends at Pearl, and they demanded changes. They didn't demand them, to their credit. They said, we don't like this. We think these products should be characterized in a different way. But after that, we lost advertising, not all their advertising forever, but they refused to send us any products for review. So if we wanted to review a Pearl product, we had to go get one.
Wow.
So,
That's interesting.
but we felt like, we weren't Consumer Reports, but we had to, if we had a really good writer and he said what was on his mind, we had to publish it at some point.
Right. Right.
Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. As Steve points out, there wasn't a lot of money to be gained there in the first place. So I always told the staff, look, we're competing with Modern Drummer and Rhythm in the mainstream market back when Rhythm was around.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only enough advertising for 1 3/4 magazines. So we got to get that extra 1/4% somehow.
Yeah, right.
To be viable. We had some great years, but
or as Steve likes to say, I'm sorry to interrupt, as Steve likes to say, there's literally thousands of dollars at stake.
Yes. Steve, the market in real dollars was about the same in 1985 as it is now, if not worse now. And that's for all musical instrument products.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about, I've seen two numbers. I've seen 4.5 and I've seen 5 billion.
Uh-huh.
And the thing you look at is 4 billion of that is done by the top 10 retailers. So there's only 1 billion left for all of the retailers. Once you take Guitar Center, Sweetwater,
Amazon,
Sam Ash,
mm-hmm.
there's 10 of them. Once you take those 10 out, that is about $4 billion. There's $1 billion for all the other hundreds or thousands or however many outlets. I saw one outlet said there are 14,000 musical instrument storefronts.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably 4,000 of those are big box. So
we just had a big dealer here.
Over 10,000 storefronts.
We just had a big dealer here. Ken Stanton had 4 or 5 shops. It's been around for 75 years, and it's now Music and Arts. And I can't blame Kenny because the writing's on the wall for that, and he made a smart move for his family. But speaking of, back to what I was saying about free, if you're on YouTube or you're looking to get as many people as you can because that's where your money comes from, right? So the people who are getting it for free are what you're selling to the advertisers or the monetization process, making that
Yeah.
statement. If you're getting it for free, you're the product, not the customer. And that has a, you know, so let's look at magazines. Let's say Modern Drummer at its highest point had, they used to say they had 100,000 subscribers. I don't know whether they did or not. It never changed. But, Sabian has almost 2 million people on their Facebook page. So, I mean, each company, I've had companies tell me when I was looking for ads on this, Drummer Nation, which you see ads here, but we're bartering for, space on their Facebook page, things like that. But they would say, look, I reached infinitely more people than you can. Why would I advertise with you? So was that I
Yeah.
mean, that's a hard question to answer, right?
I don't completely agree with that because I think if you got a really good deep story today on Music Radar, which is the UK publication that used to have Rhythm and a bunch of guitar magazines. If you get a really good deep story there, or even RollingStone.com or what have you, you get an audience of serious. You're kind of getting that layer of the readership that buys a lot of products and reads a lot of stuff, and so you can still have an impact with a real quality thing. But and Sabian and Zildjian could have 2 million followers on Facebook, and it doesn't mean that more than 287 of them are going to see any particular post.
Right.
So I don't entirely buy that argument, but it's set up that way. And even an outlet like Music Radar, so they've been around a long time, they've got good journalists, but if you look at the articles that they write, and they have to write in order to generate traffic on the internet as a medium, the big article is not a great story about Kenny Rogers, drummer in the studio, and the big article is not even an article about Steve Gadd. It's something like the 25 best female drummers. That'll get you big numbers, but I don't know if that will sell your new cymbal.
That's a good point. And Rolling Stone is not just focused on drums too. It's a whole entertainment industry magazine.
Yeah.
Yes, it's small. The universe, the universe of consumers is small to begin with, and so you have to get an enormous share of a very small audience in order to have any numbers that are impressive. Phil, I told while we were waiting for you to go on, Phil, I basically, I told Michael I deferred to Phil on everything. But I know one of the things, because you really were a pioneer in the business and really pursued the business side and had the contacts. And one of the things you did when I began working with Classic Drummer. And by the way, in the beginning, we also founded, before I purchased the magazine, I founded the Classic Drummer Hall of Fame, which is another thing that generates readership. Virtually any kind of poll will. But one of the things that you did is you did a cooperative of some sort where people shared lists and did, I'm not sure precisely how it worked, but my impression was that people shared their lists and you did emails, and then people participated based on their activity. And and I never participated, frankly, because I didn't know the scale of anything. All I know is the business that my primary business was consumer electronics, major appliances, furniture, and bedding. And those audiences are massive.
Yeah.
And so I was frankly embarrassed with the scale of my audience. I wasn't sure I wanted to share that with what it took me a while to learn that that I wasn't really a competitor, but the scale of the whole thing was such that even reasonable success as a percentage of the universe
Yes.
still wasn't much.
It wasn't much. And so, you know what this means is that even at the biggest companies, like sometimes we would get a reader write to us and say, I know that you're going to be unfair to my product because you're taking money from the huge companies like Ludwig or whatever. And I want to say, no, 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 no. Watch out. There's only two companies in this whole industry that approach $1 billion. That's Roland and Yamaha.
Yeah.
And that's mostly not Fender. Drums.
Yep.
That's not drum. In Yamaha's case, it's all products.
Right.
And even in those companies, you're dealing with people that are in this business because of their passion. They could make a lot more money as a product manager in a tech company.
Right.
But they're doing this because they love music. They love music education. They are musicians. And it goes all the way down to the one-man companies. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of people that are in this industry. That's one reason the industry's fun.
Yeah, that's what I am. I'm a one-man company, and I don't make a dime at this. I spend more than I take in, but I don't take in anything really. But I like to think that in 50 years, somebody's going to want to see those interviews. Just like I would have loved to have seen, Shelly Manne talking to Max.
I would do anything for a Shelly Manne interview. I agree with you 1,000%.
And we just have to go to YouTube, see what we can
the things
find.
He could talk about. And he could talk about Sonny Rollins and Way Out West, and it would be amazing. So,
and Love Boat, and everything in between. Yeah.
I would love a website that could take all the interviews ever done with every drummer in the world and pile it into one website. It'd be terrific.
Well, let's talk about some of these websites. Podcasting is kind of giving way to webcasting because YouTube is where a lot of it happens. You don't have to pay for hosting and all. Mm-hmm. But I was just looking at some of these. You have Drum Channel. He's fantastic with what they do. Mike Dolbear, John DeChristopher's got one with Modern Drummer. You have Rich Redmond, Working Drummer. I'm reading these. Drummers Resource, Weekly Groovecast, Minor Radio, Drumeo, Nashville Drummers, Worship Drummers, The Drum Show, Drum Hangs, Drummer Talk, and there's probably a couple of hundred more. So one of the things that's happening is, well, first, there's no fact checkers on these things, and the interviews are circumspect at best, but I think the artists are just getting pounded with requests for interviews. I mean, that's one of the reasons I stopped doing them is how many can they do,
Yeah.
They got to be getting tired of that, and none of them pay any money, and they're it's just too much.
Well, there's a pattern. There's a pattern to these. Remember, I did an article where I looked at 40 podcasts about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I was in that.
15 of them were already deceased, and they all sort of had an average from between about 60 and 100 podcasts. Mm-hmm. The host would give up because he would make Steve's observation. He would realize that this never was a business.
Right.
It just looked like a business.
Right. Well, I didn't give up on the interviews for that reason, just so much as it was time to do something else, and there was a glut of it out there.
Okay.
And it's all for fun anyway, but I had no illusions from right after I started that there was any money in it.
It's fair though, because one thing that happens when you're making money and you have to make money, it concentrates your attention and your focus really well. Mm-hmm. And so to have all of these businesses where there's the risk is that you're going to waste your time, not your money. Right. And it's good that there were, but I think the podcasts that fell by the wayside were, amateurish and a little less interesting than some of the ones that sustained. But I can't imagine that very many at all, except maybe something like Drummers Resource, which is hooked up with a much bigger network and is also producing podcasts for other people, is a business.
Mm-hmm. That's I'm spacing on his name. Friend of mine. Who has that?
That's Nick Ruffini.
Nick Ruffini, of course. Yeah, he does a great job with that, and he's been doing it a long time.
Drum Channel, of course, is started by Don Lombardi, and and its focus is more making money off of the lesson material than off the podcast entertainment.
Right. But I mean, he's doing it right. He's got, first of all, a talent pool in LA of the greatest players in the world at his disposal, and a lot of them are on the show. And he's got a full-blown video studio you could shoot a movie in.
Terrific video studio, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know that it makes any money, but he's set the bar really for video production that we can only aspire to.
Yeah, there can't be more than 2 or 3 people in the drumming world who make their primary living off of podcasting, webcasting.
Mm-hmm. And that's okay, you know. It's not, every business is not meant to be Starbucks, you know.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that there's a podcast out of Atlanta. You know the one I'm referring to.
Michael Rick Beato.
Beato.
Yeah, Phil knows that one.
I love this guy, and so he will do a deep dive into the finances of from a YouTube perspective of a very successful podcast. He has millions of views or hundreds of thousands of views.
Oh, he's got like 3 million subscribers now.
And his explanation is, yeah, that's cute, but there's no money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even at that scale. And so what's happening is there are a few folks out there who are really proclaiming that the emperor has no clothes, that almost regardless of how successful you are, unless you're a Kardashian or something, there's no money. And so even if you execute, and he executes at a very high level, and he makes money, but it's not, if you look at his studio time and what his time is worth, and the amount of time his videos are very nicely produced, the amount of time he puts into those. I own a media production company, or owned it. I just sold it, thankfully. So they tell me I'm retired, so we'll see. But I know the value of that a client would pay to have something put together that nicely, and then you look at his return on that, and it is, again, he's doing a service to the viewer, and in more ways than one, because he brings a very entertaining program, in my opinion. But he also explains the frustrations and the difficulty of getting YouTube to pay a fair rate, and to not attack what he perceives as fair use of music and those kinds of things.
He's trying to defend his copyright rights, and I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
So, and he is starting to go live. He's starting to do live events around the country. So that has been the internet 2 response to things, is that you use Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or Facebook to build an audience, and then you also have to find another channel to monetize further, because those platforms, they're not really set up to enrich very many creators. And that's just a fact of life. I don't want it to sound like a downer, because Rick sells his books and does all this. But when you talk to those YouTube creators, one of the things that comes out is that it's such a hustle. You got to have new content all the time. So these people are working all the time just to feed the monster of variety and new content, and they can't stop. They can't stop for a second, because they don't have subscribers, they don't have monthly advertisers, and all the things that the media companies had in a previous era.
So I've been getting into camping. I've been getting into camping lately, so I watch these camping videos, and these guys are putting up videos like every week, some of them more than once a week. And what happens is they're running out of topics, or they'll do 3 minutes on, new gear I found that I like, or 10 things you shouldn't forget, or, 3 minute, 4 minute, 5 minute, or some of them are camping for 3 hours, and that's all on video too. But for every topic, these guys who are trying to make money at it, I mean, it kind of owns you after a while,
Yeah, it does own you.
like any business. Well, one of the things Steve said is, look, we could put a whole company together, and then we've got a payroll, and then we've got a production schedule, and we've got rent, and we've got all these things. You got a nut you have to make every month, and that takes some of the enjoyment out of it as well.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this group, Pamplemousse.
Mm-mm.
They're big on YouTube. That means grapefruit in French, and they have been doing this for years. So they've evolved their production process to where they do a lot of covers, but they also do originals. Now, they used to record all this stuff themselves. Now they hire studio musicians in LA. Once a month, they fly to LA. They lay down 4 tracks. Now they have a new single every week. And then they go home and they start doing their regular shows and so forth because they got the content for the month. And sometimes there's videos too. They're working all the time.
Yeah. Wow.
All the time.
How about the events? The events that are associated with, PASIC, NAMM. It seems like the ones doing best are some of the small drum shows, right? Like Chicago. Anybody hear about the Music City one in Nashville last weekend? How it went?
I haven't gotten a report yet. I would love to know. I saw some posts on social media coming out from that.
They're easy to attend. They're cheap. They're fun. It's not as big a deal as a NAMM show that's going to cost you 50 grand to go exhibit at.
Also, to Steve's earlier point, Sweetwater has a big show in the summer. I don't know what their plans are for this year, but before COVID, it was huge. And some of the manufacturers were skipping Summer NAMM to go to the Sweetwater event, which drew 10 or 15,000 musicians for a weekend, where they got to climb all over the gear and take lessons and so forth. And there again, you're getting that cream of the crop consumer at an event like that.
Bypassing the merchant.
Yes.
Going straight to the consumer.
Yeah. And bypassing the media too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the play for every manufacturer.
Yeah.
I've said from the beginning, every manufacturer would like to take the retailer out of the loop. Mm-hmm. The retailer is something they is a necessary evil for most manufacturers. They'd like to be able to set up a website, be more like Apple, have people, when Apple was going almost directly before they opened at retail stores, but have a lot more control, have their own employees representing the product in store, all those kinds of things. Again, the Apple model is a very desirable model for a lot of folks. And you see some of the large companies, Samsung does some of that.
Fender's doing a lot of that.
Yeah.
They've got the online education, and
the writing's been on the wall for a long time with that. When I started with Bosphorus in 2004 and 5, dealers were really upset about the fact that I would sell to a dealer who sold online, not that I was selling online. So it had a lot of, it was slow in changing to all of that. And I would try to tell them, look, it's not up to you or me as a manufacturer or a dealer. It's up to the customers. And like at that point, maybe 5% of musicians said they were comfortable buying online. And I would say, do you think that number is going to be bigger or smaller next year? And obviously it's like 50% now, and that's where everything is at. And those people who didn't see that coming, it's like, woe to any business that doesn't listen to their customer base.
By the way, I make that statement about retail begrudgingly. I'm a former retailer. I had a chain of stores for a while, and I spent the second half of my career representing independent retail stores for another category. So my retail is in my blood. My loyalty is toward independent retailers. So I don't take. It's disturbing to me that a motivator for a supplier would be to minimize the retailer's input in the path to purchase, but that's just the facts.
It is what it is. Yeah. I always thought they did a great job at what they do. May not have been the best thing for me, but I didn't want that job too. I already had to design symbols and make them and import them and market them and sell them and all that. Let somebody else be a retailer. I was happy to have them.
And so many of these retailers now are, they're kind of hyper focused locally in a way that they may not have been back in the heyday of retailing. You'll find little stores that don't look like much from the outside, but you go inside and you find out they have 300 or 400 music students, and
That's the secret.
that's their bread and butter.
That's the secret. There's a piece in the music trades that I scanned when I was sort of getting my bearings for this call, and the piece was that Guitar Center is focusing on the first time player, the student, and so these acquisitions, the Ken Stanton acquisition, a perfect example here in Atlanta. These acquisitions are targeted toward students, not toward the retail foot traffic and the retail volume, although that's significant because that's a very successful operation. But more important to them, they know how to sell boxes. That's
Yes.
You can do that with the stroke of a pen. What's hard to do is build the relationships and build the trust with students and build that word of mouth with parents so that they entrust their children to you. They know they can't do that with a stroke of a pen. That's not easy to do corporately.
Yeah.
That has to be done on a very human level. And so these companies, these small companies who are very good at that, to your point, Phil, those are very attractive targets for acquisition for these big multi-billion-dollar players.
Yeah.
Mhm. And Kenny really his dad built that whole thing on lessons and instrument rentals and, being tight with the school systems and all that. So that was a good acquisition for them. Well, listen, I don't want to keep you guys all day. Let me throw out one more question. What about the future of drum publications? Because a lot of them, they're not in print anymore, but they're online. What are we gaining and losing that way? And what do you see happening down the road? Either one of you.
I'd like to say one thing. The track record of some of the biggest startups in the entire media business is not that good. If you look at the real status of a company like BuzzFeed or what was Ariana Huffington's company, HuffPost.
Huffington
Yeah.
Post.
These things have sold for a lot of money, but in terms of turning profits day in and day out, they're not that great.
Mhm.
And those are things 1,000 times bigger than
Exactly right.
a drumming website or an auto harp website or whatever.
It reminds me of the music industry, the record industry, when these big corporations bought into the sexiness of a record label. You're hanging with the musicians and it's backstage passes and all. And then they realized that the labels were the least performing assets they had in the amalgamation of the corporation. And we're looking to get rid of them eventually.
Yeah, you have to nurture content. The really, really good content requires so much passion and love on top of whatever knowledge and skills you have to collect to run into the business, whether it's great movie making or whatever. I heard a guy one time at a conference say, he said, you got to separate industries by their size versus their impact. Telephones is a big, big industry. Movies impact the culture a lot more, but they're nothing compared to telephones.
It's a $10 billion industry, the whole industry, soup to nuts.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's well put.
Well, music too. Look at how people's lives are touched by music in a way that you can't put your finger on. I'll just say this story and we'll wrap it up. I had an astronomy teacher once in college, and his first day he said, I'm going to introduce you to some friends in this class that will be with you for the rest of your lives. Good times, bad times, falling in love, whatever. And you can always count on me. And he said, I'm talking about the stars. It's a very cool intro, right? But I use that when I taught jazz history. I mean, that's what this is all about, right? When you listen to music, it's going to touch you in ways you can't even explain. And that music will be your friend, so to speak, through good times and bad for the rest of your lives. And if you don't have that passion in the business side of it, it ain't going to work. On the other hand, if you don't have the business side of it with the passion, that ain't going to work either. Would you agree?
Yeah,
Well put.
well put. And I think the when I look at the balance sheet of the magazine business, my accountant is not at all impressed. But if we had some time and I could share with you the experiences that I've had with some of the music's greatest artists, people who've touched people for generations, and I've shared many of those with Michael, it is priceless.
I'll tell a
Absolutely
few, Steve, that
priceless.
we're still pinching ourselves over. Steve was crazy about Hal Blaine. It was like his favorite drummer, and he got to spend a whole day with Hal. A whole day with media interview and video and the whole thing. And I got to do an interview for Steve just off the cuff that happened with Zigaboo, who's like, I just wanted to genuflect or something, say
Yeah.
I'm not worthy. And we went out to dinner after that and had a bottle of Veuve champagne. And I mean, we were on top of the world in a way that wouldn't happen if I got a big commission from a sale or something.
And I've turned out some really, really large projects. I don't remember much about them.
Mm-hmm.
Seven-figure projects that honestly, I know a little about them. I can tell you everything about my day with Hal Blaine. I can tell you everything about our experience with Zig, and we could go down a list of folks. We did the last interview with Remo.
That's right.
And
I did it. Yeah.
it's priceless.
Yeah,
Priceless.
Yeah.
And
To me, to us,
yeah.
Yeah.
to us drummers.
Well,
Phil,
it's
you
pri-
must
and
have.
to his family, and to his family. They had
They
seen
loved it. Yeah. Phil, you must have something that stands out like that.
Those kinds of things.
Oh, some of the people that impressed me the most, well, like interviewing Max Roach.
Mm.
The day I was sitting at my desk, we'd been trying for 2 years to get Willie Nelson to do an interview to talk about guitars, and his publicist, didn't even understand it. She was like, well, we got to wait until he's got a record coming out. You don't want to just talk about something. She thought, what's
Right.
the promotion angle? I would say there is no promotion angle. There's people that want to know about Willie's guitar. And then one day I'm sitting at my desk with a bunch of people in my office. The phone rings and I hit the speaker and the voice says, Phil, this is Willie. Let's talk guitar.
There you go. That's what I thought. I knew you had some stories like that. Too.
That's fantastic.
And he stayed on the phone for 2.5, 3 hours.
Wow.
And that's why we do this, folks.
Because he loved it. Because he loved it too.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that would happen is walking around the NAMM show, you'd meet somebody and you got to talking to them and you'd find out they were on this really obscure band from the 60s. But it was a band that I had the record of. And I would say, man, you were incredible. You were a great bass player. What a great record, even if it only sold 25 copies. And they would laugh, but they affected me. They affected other people that listened to them. And that's
what matters.
That is what matters.
That is
all right. Well, that's a positive
Maybe you
note.
weren't Paul McCartney, but on that day you were in the studio. You were great.
That's right.
That's right. Well, that's a great note to leave it on because it's very positive. I can't thank you guys enough. Phil
right.
Hood and Steve Bryant,
Pleasure,
veteran
always.
publishers,
Good to see you, Steve.
and my good friends.
My pleasure.
So I'm going to hit a couple of commercials on the way out and let it go, guys, and appreciate it very much. One
We
more
gotta have a
reminder.
drink in Atlanta one of these days.
We will. I do teach drum
Perfect.
lessons. I wanted to get
All right.
that little plug in, and we'll get it away. And here we go on the way out. Thank you, guys. Drummers who prefer dark cymbals with fast responses will love the HH Vanguard series from Sabian. Vanguard provides an elegant, complex sound that is always musical. Each model is fully hand-hammered to be thin and light, with a flatter profile for a deep fundamental tone and a smaller, musically integrated bell. The result is a clean, woody stick definition with exceptional articulation and responsiveness. Find detailed information at Sabian.com/Vanguard. Memphis Drum Shop is the world's premier provider of percussion instruments. With 6 showrooms of gear, MyCymbal.com, the Memphis Gong Chamber, and a first-rate repair department, turn to Memphis Drum Shop for all your percussion needs.